My name's Mark and I'm an intensive care paramedic in Taranaki. Been in New Zealand for 10 years and before that, since 1993, I worked in London as an ALS, as a CBR responder, as a manager and as an instructor. I've got a wife, 2 kids, and in my spare time I'm a musician and I've written 3 children's books and there's a 4th one on the way. What I love about being on the road is making a difference, not only to patients but also to colleagues. We moved to New Zealand 10 years ago for a change of lifestyle, but I still enjoy the work. I still enjoy getting up and knowing that I'm going to make a difference to someone's life. I remember the job where I first fell over inside. We got called to a guy, it was a shooting, and that can mean a number of things, but it was a shooting. But we went to a guy who was, he obviously had blown his brains out in a house. And I've seen that kind of thing before, but I don't know. I walked in, there was stuff all up the walls. I remember the house, I remember going to the table where he'd written a note to his daughter, and something inside me snapped. It just, I thought, I don't want to do this anymore. And I remember, clearly we couldn't do anything. So I remember walking out with my colleague. I remember who I was working with. I remember writing it up on the side of the road. I remember doing it slowly because I didn't want another job. I remember not wanting to talk to my colleague, rightly or wrongly. I just wanted to be on my own. I remember going back to station and withdrawing. And I remember burying it. And I survived for another 6 or 7 years, I would say. I didn't know, but I did become more insular. I became more selfish. I think with that you become more unable to self-analyse. And interestingly, my wife said on a number of occasions something was wrong, but I couldn't see or hear that. And so little things grew to big things because I wasn't dealing with it. Burying it's easier than dealing with it. And sometimes you don't even know that you're doing that. But I ended up running away, driving slowly to jobs that I think might scare me, lying awake at night, the night before my next shift, thinking, what am I going to go to? I don't want to go to sleep. My pulse rate would go up in the ambulance when I was going to certain types of job, and not the jobs you'd think about, just some jobs you just think, I don't want to be here, I don't want to be here. And it culminated sometimes with things like out-of-body experiences, which sounds really weird, but I remember treating a guy with a broken leg with a colleague who thankfully knew what they were doing, and I was watching myself doing the treatment. I was not present. And I've since learned that is a coping mechanism to withdraw from the pain that's inside. And so there are lots of little things that build up to big things, and if you don't deal with them, it's like shards of glass. You do a little job and a little shard of glass sticks in you, and you don't really notice it, and then you do another job and that job sticks in you and a little shard of glass, and you don't realise it, but lots and lots and lots of little shards of glass are sticking inside, and they grow, and then one day there's one final shard of glass and it explodes and you just fall over. But it's been a real slow build up, and those shards of glass got to me and I fell over. And what was really interesting was I'm an intensive care paramedic. I've got a huge amount of experience, over a quarter of a century. I've given speeches internationally for exhibitions, for ambulance. I've been in some really hairy situations. And people look to me for support. And when I fell over, people said, but you've got it all together. How come you're falling over? And Robin Williams was, everyone said, how come he was so funny? How come he committed suicide? And I think it's really important to realise that just because you're successful doesn't mean you don't have demons. Some of the early warning signs I didn't see, but my wife said I was slightly more irritable, slightly more selfish. I came home and I'd be withdrawn. I'd be less able to communicate, less wanting to go out somewhere. I'd be more tired. I'd be slightly more withdrawn, just less myself. And all these are basically self-protection. One of the early things is anger. You become angry, and not because you are angry, but you don't want people intruding into your space because you are protecting yourself in your space. And so you become angry that people try to involve themselves in that. And it's very subconscious. When I finally admitted that there was an issue, and that was a thing in itself, initially I thought it's not going to work. I thought I'm strong enough, there isn't an issue. When my wife and I seriously talked about maybe I had to move out for a bit, I realised that maybe I did have an issue. I went to a psychologist. I was worried that I was just going to be on a conveyor belt, that she wasn't going to treat me as an individual. I was worried that it wasn't going to work. As we developed a relationship professionally, I realised that this was going to work, but I didn't want to do it because it was going to hurt. And she took me through some things and to places I really didn't want to go. It was a really crap journey, revisiting, unpacking. But through all that, my doctor described it as an abscess. It hurts, it's mucky, it's really painful, but you have to clean it out. But once it's clean, once mentally I had that abscess cleared, I got some really good strategies and awareness and an ability to know when I was going down the rabbit hole and when there were times that I needed to pull out those strategies and say, no, this is what you need to think, this is what you need to do, this is how you need to respond. So the journey was, I really don't want to do this, I don't trust her, I hate this, actually, this is okay. I think PTSD is a label, and as such, it's not always helpful. I also think disorder is the wrong thing. It's an injury, and you can recover from injury. There are lots of types of post-traumatic stress injury, and not all of them will be able to be labelled as exactly that, but there are lots of types of not coping, lots of types of stress, lots of types of not being able to deal with stuff. In my opinion, it never leaves you, but with the right treatment, and certainly with my psychologist, I became resilient. I became able to cope without building walls, and I became able to function without shutting out other human beings. I was able to relate to other human beings. What's scared me is how many people, not just in the service but also worldwide, have contacted me and said they recognise my story and they've self-medicated with drugs, alcohol, they've struggled, they've had marriage difficulties, but they've not known where to go. I think if you deal with it, you get almost an early warning system, and it almost makes you stronger, because what you end up with is you know what the triggers are and you have the strategies to deal with them, and therefore you actually become a better practitioner because you have those strategies. As far as strategies for other people, for new recruits, I think the first thing to say is that it's okay to think and feel and be scared and be horrified. That's just being human. I don't think the impact of the job we do is unavoidable. And we have to be professional on the scene. We have to deal with a job. But everyone's an individual. Not everyone wants to debrief. Not everyone certainly wants to have a formal debrief. And it's okay to think and to dream and to play it through in your mind. That's normal. But if it's as vivid on day 30 as it was on day 2, you're not dealing with it, and you need to get some help. You need to deal with stuff. Now, informal help from a friend is fine, But professional help also, you need to think about that because it really does help. Psychologists are actually really good. It's often really tempting to go along with the black humour on station. If that hurts inside, get help because you're not dealing with it. And also be on your guard for unreasonable or unexpected anger or a lack of coping. If you're getting a lot of flashbacks or if you're avoiding something, you know you're avoiding it. If you're a little more anxious or if you're sleeping badly, if you're reliving some of these things, they are significant warning signs. And they are dealable. I wrote a letter of resignation to leave work after 25 years. I didn't want to leave. It was a way of making the pain stop. A year and a bit later, I'm back, I'm functioning well, I'm in the Tango car. I've done some really hairy jobs, I've done some really good stuff, I've supported a lot of crews, I've treated a lot of patients. And I tell you, a year ago, I'd have told you you'd be mad if you'd ever walk inside that ambulance station ever again. But it's worked for me, and I hope it works for you.